Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion. It's not a straightforward review. It's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. Show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And I'd like to take a moment to thank a couple of patrons, Philip Barker, Michael Cross, and Josh Johnson. Thanks so much for keeping the lights on. If you do sign up, you get a weekly bonus episode of everything else I'm watching that week. So that's where all my TV shows and other things I'm watching, you can catch me on there. Now, if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate this show. It helps new listeners find us. But without further ado, let's get down to the show. I want to welcome back a returning voice you've heard on this podcast quite a few times, and that is Scott. Say hi, Scott.
Hi! I always feel so embarrassed when I do this because it's like, oh, everyone's going, oh, him again. And I'm just like...
I doubt anyone is saying
Oh,
that.
but I love your show so much.
Oh, yeah, we appreciate you on this show, obviously. Very much appreciate you coming back. Well, Scott, in case, I kind of doubt it, but in case somebody hasn't heard your voice on the show before, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit?
Of course. My name is Scott McClellan. I am the co-host of DC Squadcast and the co-founder of Squadcast Media, a podcast network devoted mainly to DC Comics content across movies, television, and comic books. I am also the co-host of the weekly YouTube show, the DC Fanimated Stream, on the Film Junkie YouTube channel, where my co-host Dave and I pontificate, make terrible jokes, and talk about every episode of the DC animated universe. We are currently in the second season of Superman the Animated Series, and
Nice.
By the time this airs, we may also be flipping back and forth between the third season of Batman the Animated Series. We're doing everything in chronological order, so we're going all the way through Justice League Unlimited.
Wonderful. I love Justice League Unlimited.
It's so good.
It's so good. Well, but we're not talking about that today. Today we're going to talk about a movie. We are in the midst of spooky season, so I've asked my guests to pick scary movies. So Scott, what movie did you choose to talk about today?
I chose to talk about one of my absolute favorite, most recent horror movies, and that is 2019's Dr. Sleep.
Okay. This is a return for me. I did see Dr. Sleep when it came out. I think we have two different opinions on it. However, I'm happy to report that I rewatched it, and I think I have a different opinion now than I did before.
Yay!
Yeah, as happens a lot of times when you revisit something. But I guess, like you said, it came out in 2019. I have so many questions. But first, I'm going to read a quick synopsis that I got, I believe, from Wikipedia. So here we go. If you haven't seen this movie before, I highly recommend pausing here, seeing it on your own, and coming back. You can watch it on HBO Max and a few other places. But it's not called HBO Max anymore. It's called Max, but you can watch it there. Or you could rent it. If you're still with us, here is the synopsis. So, struggling with alcoholism, Dan Torrance remains traumatized by the sinister events that occurred at the Overlook Hotel when he was a child. His hope for a peaceful existence soon becomes shattered when he meets Abra, a teen who shares his extrasensory gift of the shine. Together they form an unlikely alliance to battle the True Knot, a cult whose members try to feed off of the shine of innocence to become immortal.
That's a really good. You always do a really good job of finding really quality synopsis.
Well, if you really look back and listen, there's some episodes where I'm like, what the heck is this? Or maybe I edit those out. I don't know. But I don't reinvent the wheel. Somebody out there has written a really good synopsis, so I leave it to them. But I appreciate that. I do think it's a very good way to summarize the movie without delving too much into everything. But yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your journey with this. Like, I'm assuming you saw it in theaters?
I did. Actually, I took my wife to go see it.
Oh, nice. Are you both fans of The Shining?
Okay. I don't think my wife is that big of a fan, or maybe she is. I really didn't ask her. I'm going to be honest with you. I, however, have got an opinion that's probably going to get me thrown into like social media jail.
I know what you're going to say.
I know.
It's okay.
I'm not that big of a fan of the Shining movie.
See? Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm not saying I don't like it. I like it. I just don't love it. And before anyone comes at me, let me explain that this opinion I've had since the first time I saw it. I saw it in high school, and I feel like the film suffered from people talking it up so much that when I finally saw it, I was just like, okay. My opinion got even more affected when I went back and actually read Stephen King's novel.
Right, because it's not like the novel.
Not at all.
Let's just get it out there right away.
Not at all.
Yeah. And I've read the book as well, but it's very, very different from the movie that we got.
Exactly. I have, to this point, I've read the book 3 times.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, well, can you tell me a little bit about, like, why do you have such a connection to the book?
You know what? It's just so darn well written. I think is what the book does that the movie doesn't do, because it wasn't what Kubrick was interested in, was right. King was working out his own issues with addiction and alcoholism, and
right.
And Jack Torrance, as portrayed in the novel, is a man who is struggling. And because you get to hear some of his inner thoughts, he's a man who's trying to do the right thing. And it's a tragedy. It's about him struggling and failing because his own demons get to him. And the movie, he's basically just, you don't like him from the first time you meet him. And there's nothing you don't see him trying to be redeemable in the course of the movie. So I feel like the movie destroys that part of his character and also undermines Wendy, his wife, because the way Shelley Duvall plays her in the movie, she's just so and helpless. And in the book, she's got some backbone, and I don't know. I don't like the way the characters get portrayed in the film, and the whole history of the Overlook and the mythology of what The Shining is gets completely left out of Kubrick's film. So, and then once again, I wasn't in love with it when I saw the movie by itself, but it was hurt even more by reading the source material and going, oh, you had all of this and you chose not to do that? Okay. So.
Yeah. I think I have the exact opposite opinion.
That's fine.
Of The Shining. For me, I feel like, I think the book does a good job of portraying Stephen King's POV on his own addiction, for sure. His struggles, I think, his fear of becoming abusive because of his addiction, his fears around like dark thoughts around his family because of his addiction. And I respect that about it. And, portraying, I think, the wife character as, like you said, being more of a strong presence. However, I feel like, to me, and you could say a lot about The Shining, and there's definitely some issues with the production and all that, but I actually think that Wendy's portrayal as somebody who's abused is pretty accurate. Not to say that I've been in her shoes specifically, but I think that Wendy is somebody who has become so beaten down by the abuse that she's endured that that's who she ends up being. She's somebody that's so afraid, constantly on edge, has shrunk in herself and her personality in the presence of her husband because he frightens her so much. I don't think that's who she is. It's who she has like become because of the situation she's in. And then I think in the movie, it's more like this is what, like, I think domestic violence kind of looks like, and so it's not really portraying the character as somebody who we're looking to redeem, but like showing how scary it can be just being in that situation and living with someone like that. And how like I feel like the way she's in the movie just constantly on eggshells, and like she can't ever say the right thing or do the right thing. She's constantly triggering him. She's so scared and she's stuck in that hotel with him. I don't know. I thought that was pretty compelling. It's definitely different from the book, and it's different from what the book's trying to do. Again, the book is written from the perspective of the author, whereas I feel like the movie is almost written from the perspective almost of Wendy. And she's kind of like the protagonist. So, and I think that kind of follows a formula that's in a lot of horror where like the female character is kind of the protagonist. So, I don't know, it works for me and I like it. I also like that it's more psychological horror than supernatural, but still has supernatural in it. Whereas I think the actual book, The Shining, is really more of a almost like a horror fantasy.
Yes, I would agree.
And so
yes.
Just so different. And so like the things that I like about the Shining movie are incredibly different from what the book is. And I recognize that, and I really like the book too, but it is a completely different genre. And so Doctor Sleep is sort of closer to the genre that The Shining was, definitely closer to the book Doctor Sleep. And it's sort of marrying the two in a way. But the things that I really, really like about The Shining and Kubrick's style, this is different from that. And if you can accept that about it and go like, this is Mike Flanagan's interpretation of it, then great. And I will say that like after watching it again, I appreciate it more. But there's just something to me that's incredibly special and unique about The Shining, and it's never going to match that for me. But if I didn't like those qualities of The Shining, I would see this as something better. So I totally understand why you like it so much. And have had several friends tell me like, oh, this is way better than The Shining. It's like, well, yeah, if you didn't like certain things about that movie, this is totally different from that. And therefore, better because it's the things you like, So I think it's just like two different opinions. And I think that that's fine. I think it's well made. And like I said, I think after watching it again, I kind of walked away with a different impression. So.
Well, and here's where I was coming from going into Doctor Sleep. Because when the movie was coming out, I was really excited for a couple of different reasons. One, I had gone down the Mike Flanagan rabbit hole on Netflix.
Oh, I love his stuff.
Oh my God.
Absolutely.
I know I had not seen his feature films prior, but I had seen everything he done on Netflix. So I had seen Gerald's Game.
Gerald's Game is
it's
great.
Amazing. I'd seen The Haunting of Hill House. I can't remember. I think this is before Bly Manor came out.
Yeah, Bly Manor's okay.
It's okay, but I also learned that why Bly Manor's only okay is because Flanagan was so busy working on Midnight Mass that
Midnight Mass is legendary.
Oh my!
Like,
oh my God!
It's
yes,
like the best thing he's ever done.
I feel like Midnight Mass is like Mike Flanagan trying to do Salem's Lot without adapting Salem's Lot, and so it's just so good. But so that's why I give Bly Manor a pass in that regard, is because he wasn't as involved in it. So I'm going into Doctor Sleep.
Yeah, you can tell.
So I'm going into Doctor Sleep going, Mike Flanagan, you the man. Like everything you've done so far. And I had, of course, I'd seen Gerald's Game, which is another Stephen King adaptation. And that was when I reread The Shining for the third time, getting ready.
I feel like you and I talked about Gerald's Game when it came out. I feel like we talked about it.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised if we did, like, just offline, like just the two of
Yeah, I
us.
think offline. Yeah.
But so I'd read The Shining for the third time, getting ready, and then I
Nice.
read the Doctor Sleep book, which I had in hardcover. I'd had it since the day it came out, but I just never gotten around to reading it. Spoiler alert, I own a lot of books. It takes me a while sometimes to get to them. And so I was really, I think I was going into the movie really curious intellectually. Like, the Doctor Sleep book is a sequel to the Shining book. But Mike Flanagan has got to make a movie that adapts that book that somehow could function as a adaptation of that book, but also be a sequel to the movie that's completely different from the Shining book. And I'm like,
Right.
and then I was just sitting there going, how is this going to work? Then I saw the movie and I was like, USOB, you did it. Like, it was like, somehow you did it. You found a way to, thread that needle of, you can watch this movie with never having read the Shining novel, and you could have only have seen Kubrick's film, and the movie still works for you because Flanagan did the incredible thing, in my opinion, which he took all the stuff that wasn't talked about in the Shining movie, that was all in the book, and he just put it in his movie. And and I was like, this is amazing. This is great. And I do remember my wife saying it made more sense to her. Like,
Oh,
because I remember now
yeah, I mean, The Shining, the movie, has lots of stuff in it that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Like, let's be honest. Like, it's intentionally unsettling in a way that's, like, meant to be a little bit disorienting and confusing.
Exactly. But I remember my wife, yeah, she did rewatch The Shining before we went to see Dr. Sleep. And after seeing Dr. Sleep, she was like, oh, that makes so much more sense now. Because Dr. Sleep did all the exposition work that The Shining had no interest, that the Shining film had no interest in doing. So it was, that's where I came in with this, was I was already a Flanagan fan. And then I'm a Stephen King fan. I mean, I'm not big on horror, but I love Stephen King. Explain that one.
But yeah, but I actually think that is explainable, because I feel like almost all of Stephen King's books have, like, this fantasy element to them, sort of a magicalness and an optimism too, that I think a lot of horror doesn't necessarily have, but he usually does in his books.
You know what? I have never heard someone explain it that way, and I think that is one of the most insightful explanations I have ever heard. I love it.
Well, I think because I love horror so much that a lot of the stuff I like is very, very dark horror. Like, I mean, I loved Hereditary and, stuff like that. And a lot of that stuff is not optimistic. I mean, it's just like 100% negative. But, like, I've always seen Stephen King, I mean, people have kind of described him as sort of like a pulpy, pop culture, almost like fast food type of writing, which I disagree with. But I think they get that because it is a little bit more optimistic. And when you think about, like, even some of the, some of the most popular stuff, like It or
The Stand,
The Body, The Stand. There's so many things that he's done, but, like, there is always this kind of, like, fun in his stories, even Carrie or anything like that. There's like a fun in there for somehow he, like, injects it with fun in it. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that you could kind of not be a huge horror fan but still like his work. Plus, I think horror's got a lot of genres within itself, so there's kind of something for everybody. So I can understand
well,
that.
I appreciate it because Stephen King is my flavor when it comes to horror. Because and so I love a Stephen King adaptation. Like, I love okay, I have to tell this story. It's a complete tangent, but it's a really funny idea if you step back and think about it. My first date ever in my life in high school was to a Stephen King movie.
That's honestly, if you were born in the 80s, which I believe we both were, that's really not that surprising.
It would.
It's just
I
everywhere.
know it was the Green Mile. Like,
Yeah, I mean, The Green Mile, there's so many movies people forget about, like Shawshank, Misery, Stand By Me is one of my favorite
yeah, I think
films.
Misery was the
Like,
first Stephen King adaptation I ever saw. Like,
nice.
I think Misery was my first Stephen King piece of media ever.
For me, it may have been The Shining.
I would believe that because I know how much you love The
Yeah.
Shining.
I know it really deeply impacted me. Well, on that note, I'm gonna share a couple of quick facts about this movie, and then we can kind of go a little bit from there. So the first thing that I had was that you kind of touched on this already, but Mike Flanagan, he painstakingly recreated the sets of the Overlook Hotel from blueprints acquired from Stanley Kubrick's estate.
Yes, I knew
And
that, and it so shows in the movie. Oh my god, even the carpet.
yes, and I feel like you can really, like from some of his other stuff, like The Haunting at Hill House and things like that. You can tell he loves sets, and like so that doesn't surprise me. Also, I had a note that Stephen King first got the idea from Doctor Sleep in 1998 at a book signing when somebody asked him what happened to Danny Torrance from his novel. And this was a question that King had often asked himself as well, like what would have happened to Jack uh, also if he had found AA, like how could his life have been different if he had, grappled with his addiction, and would Dan be any different? When people kept asking him the question, King would jokingly say that Danny married Charlene McGee from Firestarter. But anyway, King eventually started thinking seriously about how old Danny was and what happened to Wendy, and then he decided to find the answers in a sequel.
Yeah, and I'd heard that story as well. So I was, it, when the book came out, it's definitely one of the situations where you're like, are you really writing a sequel to The Shining? Like,
Yeah, it's like, are you
are you
sure?
sure? Have you thought about this, Stephen? Really?
But it turned out well. And what one last thing that I was going to share is that in the Doctor Sleep novel, Andy leaves the theater showing Raiders of the Lost Ark, but in the film, uh, the theater is showing Casablanca,
Yes,
which is
and of
Mike
course,
Flanagan's favorite movie.
what both of them are great movies, but of
Right.
course the reason for that would being that Casablanca is a Warner Brothers movie, so they can, and Doctor Sleep is a Warner Brothers movie, so ta-da! Kind of like how in Ready Player One they had to substitute war games for The Shining of all things
That's funny.
because of movie rights.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've talked a little bit about some quick facts. We've talked a little bit about Mike Flanagan himself. Do you want to talk a little bit about the cast?
Absolutely, because that was another draw for me when it came to this
Mm.
movie, particularly our two adult leads. I'm
Mm-hmm.
fans, so let's go.
Yeah. Let's talk about Ewan McGregor as Dan Torrance.
You know what? The only thing that I think I find distracting, and it's not even that he does it badly. It's just because I know what his real voice sounds like. It's just him talking in American accent the whole movie.
It's weird. I there are times when I'm like, I can't decide how I feel about Dan. Like, I'm like, is he too muted? Is he too? I mean, he's very serious and like I don't know what I expected an adult Dan Torrance to be like, but for somehow it wasn't this. And so that kind of I had to kind of get used to that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think going back to your point about how Kubrick decided to portray Wendy in the Shining movie,
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to think about, well, you're talking about a man who, as a 5-year-old boy, went through, oh dear God, what he went through.
Right. It's like he's not going to be like that little boy. So I don't know what exactly I was expecting, but from 5 to 45, that's a huge leap.
Exactly. So I think it's just the idea that he's traumatized. He
Mm-hmm.
is an abuse victim. He
Mm-hmm.
survived, you know, soul eating ghosts in a dreaded hotel and, got attacked by his own father. It's like, and also the idea that his gift continues to haunt him even after that. It's like he's doing everything not to shine. And that's a point they make in the movie. So the quiet mutedness, I think, is just, I don't know, it's understandable, and I think Ewan does a really good job with that.
Well, he's a great actor.
Oh, he's a fabulous actor.
I have another comment. Are Ewan McGregor and Rebecca Ferguson both Irish?
Ewan McGregor is Scottish.
Oh, he's Scottish?
And
dang. I knew as soon as I said that I had said something wrong. Sorry to all my Scottish listeners. Sorry, Steve.
And you want to know the funny thing? Rebecca Ferguson is Swedish.
Really? I really thought she was Irish like this whole time. Because I feel like she's always playing somebody Irish.
No, Rose, I think, is supposed to have some sort of Irish background to her based on what I can kind of remember from the book. It's been a hot minute since I read the book. But no, Rebecca Ferguson was actually born in Sweden but raised in England. So that's why she's got when you hear her talk, she actually has an English accent. But she was born in Sweden.
Okay.
So that's
okay.
Yeah.
Well, good to know. Go ahead. Sorry. I feel like you're about to say something.
Well, I think Ewan McGregor is such a talented actor who also, also has fabulous hair. Like
he does.
It's a weird quirk, but I always recognize fabulous hair. And as someone who doesn't have much himself, but I think the thing that Ewan McGregor brings to this role is he does bring that quiet mutedness, but there's also a fatherly protectiveness in him.
Yeah, I think they address that really well in the movie, too.
How so? I'm kind of curious. Like, where do you get that vibe?
Well, I think his relationship with Abra obviously mirrors the relationship that Danny and Dick Halloran had. And I even think the choice to cast a woman of color as Abra is kind of a nice end cap, too. Because it's like, in the first movie, it was like an older black gentleman and a young white kid. And now it's kind of like the reverse of that.
I think that's kind of neat. That is neat. I didn't even think about that.
I feel like it, I remember reading and thinking that in the movie The Shining, I don't know, I always felt like if you ever watch like any behind the scenes of that movie, the way that Scatman Crothers cared so deeply for the actor that portrayed Danny, I found that very touching. I remember he's like misty-eyed talking about it and talking about what a special time he had on that movie. I feel like I'm going on a tangent here. But anyway, I felt like that character had more to give than you actually get in the movie. Halloran does, and he's more important in the book.
He's very much more important in the book. Yes.
Yeah. He's not just like some magical guy that's like, oh, shining, He's like really involved. And so I feel like by making the new Danny character a young woman of color, I feel like was a good idea to kind of, have more to do for a character like that in a movie that maybe wasn't as diverse. I don't know. I like that. And then their relationship is just, he addresses it. I do think that like for most audiences, he says it in the movie. He's like an adult man and a teenage girl. Like,
when they're sitting on the park bench. Yeah. Yes.
He's like, and I'm like, yeah, we would all think that if we saw like a 45-year-old man and like a teenager, we'd all be like, what's going on there? Should I intervene? But I feel like he does a good job of addressing that, and he comes across as fatherly, and then we know his relationship with someone that he was not related to as a child, and so you can kind of see how he's like recreating that relationship, and I think the audience like accepts it because of that,
Yes.
I don't know. I thought they tackled that pretty well in the movie.
And I also think that, kind of to my point of what I like about Jack Torrance's portrayal in the novel The Shining, I think you have to get an actor like Ewan McGregor to play Danny the way he does, because when we first get introduced to adult Danny, it's a terrible situation that he does not react to well at all.
Yeah.
And yet we're allowed to go on the journey with him as he like there's even a line in the movie, you know, the question is, do you want? Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? He says that
Yeah.
to Billy says that to him, and then he says that, you know, that line that a recovering alcoholic always has to say, which is, I need help. Because the
Yeah.
first step of getting help is having to admit that you need it. And yet there's a moment, and because you got Ewan McGregor there playing that role, you know he needs help. But the way Ewan McGregor portrays it, it's like, we're rooting for it. Like, we want you to get better. Like, we want this for you.
I think there's an empathy that I feel for Danny that I struggle to feel for Jack, if I'm
No,
honest. Like, I don't know if that's
yeah.
just like the setting and like we don't get to know Jack as much as we get to know Danny, but like I know that Jack as a character, he must have gone through something traumatic as a child as well that made him turn out the way that he did, but I just felt less empathy for him, you know, and but then Danny as an adult, it's like I saw him go through all that trauma. So I have an easier time relating to him as a character, you know.
Oh no, I completely agree. And I'm like, again, I said, all credit to Ewan McGregor for the way that he
Oh
portrays
yeah.
it in this film.
Yeah. And do you feel too that you know, it I think it accurately, not accurately, I mean, I don't know what this is like, but I really buy his redemption a lot more somehow than I did, I think, even in The Shining. Like, I feel like Danny really breaks the cycle
Mm-hmm.
as a character,
Yes.
and I like you said, I mean, you root for him.
Yes, you do. Well, I think because in it, and I'm talking from the perspective of the novel of The Shining, Jack never
Hmm.
breaks the cycle. He tries, but he fails.
Yeah, he kind of does in death a little
Yes,
bit.
he.
It's like you can forgive him in death, but he doesn't do it in his
Well, you don't
life.
even really forgive him. It's just like it's more of a good. You did that. That's the least you could have done.
Yeah, it's like kind of like I don't know, like Darth Vader at the very end, where you're like, well, he's not a good person, but at least he loved his son, you know, and he did one or two good things, I guess.
Exactly. And so I'm with you on that. I'm not saying that Jack is a good person. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that there's more of a struggle in the book.
Yes, he's more
He's
layered.
more
He's
layered,
not.
yes. And
Yeah.
so, but no, Danny is entirely more empathetic and sympathetic. Absolutely. There's no question about that.
And who plays? Is Jack in the movie? Is it Henry
It's Henry
Thomas? I
Thomas.
forget.
Yes.
It's so crazy. Like when I saw this movie the first time, I didn't realize that at all. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like what? It's Elliot.
Well, because Mike Flanagan does that thing that
Yes.
auteur directors, and I'm going to call Flanagan an auteur, but you know, where he has a troupe. Like, there are just certain actors who are just going to, even if they're little bit parts, he has his cast that's going to show up in everything, one way or another. And
Yeah, and he's even got what's his name in this too? Bruce
Bruce
Greenwood
Greenwood is the
too.
doctor.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So
The only one
good.
who's missing is his wife, Kate Siegel. I know.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Kate's missing.
Eh. He puts her in a lot of
He
stuff.
does put her in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, oh, go ahead.
Speaking of screen wives, let's talk about Rebecca Ferguson.
Your screen wife.
She is a screen wife. I have, it's funny. I have friends who make complete fun of me for this because they know how much I crush on Rebecca Ferguson. But there was that concept from the Friends TV show called the Hall Pass. You know, the idea of like people who like are on a list. If you had the chance, your significant other would just go, "Yes, honey, I understand." And and I have screen wives, as I call them, and Rebecca Ferguson is one of them. What can I say?
She is vaguely Carla Gugino-ish to me. Like I think that
Ooh.
he hired her because he kind of does. She kind of does look like his wife. I don't know, like a little bit. There's something in the eyes. I don't know,
Uh,
but She's a great villain in this movie,
Oh
I
God,
think.
she's a character you're like, you are so sexy, and I
Yeah.
am scared of you to the death at the same time.
Yeah, sexy, but, age appropriate. Like, she seems like an adult,
Mm-hmm.
like, and I think when you have villains, they've kind of got to be on equal footing with the main character. I love how she calls him handsome, like, the whole movie. Because, I mean, it is Ewan McGregor. He is
Oh
handsome.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I don't think they're equal. I totally think that I mean, she's more powerful than he is.
Oh, for
Absolutely.
sure. That's true. But I guess I mean, how, I don't know. She's not an unimposing villain, I
Oh no,
guess is
she
a better
she
way
is
of
a
putting it.
very imposing villain. Like
Yeah.
I mean, we meet her before we meet Danny. Like the movie opens with her doing a awful thing,
Yes.
and I thought that was like what an amazing thing to like. Oh no, we're gonna meet our villain first,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna see her kill a child, and and
Yeah.
and not the first time. It's the first time. It's not the last time you're going to see that happen in this movie. And we're going to talk about that scene. We have to talk about that scene. Um, but Rebecca Ferguson it's just this. It's like you believe how you can see how she would have this cult of personality. Like why all these
Mm-hmm.
members of the True Knot would follow her. But then you could also
Yeah.
see how she could lure a child because that first scene with Violet, the little girl,
Yeah.
and it's just so believable, and you're just like it is that seductive evil.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't.
Well, and she's pretty and
Hmm.
she looks normal and like I feel like children are really socialized to be like afraid of strangers, but usually male strangers, and so I feel like kids would get like tricked by her because they're not on the lookout for someone like her.
I think that's a great point, and I think to Stephen King's credit, that's what makes it scary.
Yeah, because she seems normal. Yeah.
And like you said,
But
we're on the lookout for strange older men, but we're
mhm,
not on the lookout for a beautiful, 30 something, 30, 40
in a
in a
hat.
hat.
What do you think about the knot, like as a concept, that cult?
The part that really sunk into me was when I went, oh, they're just psychic vampires.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I mean, in The Shining, they established the idea that people have this gift, that multiple people have this gift. And so it does set up sort of a universe where, yeah, there would be good people and bad people with that gift. Like, I like that.
Oh yeah. Well, and then also the book and the movie of The Shining established that that energy can be used for good or for evil because like the
Right.
hotel basically
Is evil,
it
yeah.
became an entity.
Mm-hmm.
It was a psychic entity of its own. And they make that point in the movie that the True Knot are just doing what the hotel did.
Yeah, yeah. They're just people running around doing it instead of the hotel. Yeah.
Exactly. So so the concept of the True Knot, I also philosophically the True Knot also offer a great antithesis to something that Danny does. Because
Mm-hmm.
the book, the movie is called Doctor Sleep. That's a nickname that Danny gets when he works as an orderly at a hospice, where
Yeah.
when he finally embraces his gift to a certain extent, is that he's helping the transition to death for these older
Mm-hmm.
people. And it's all about it's okay. Go to sleep. Be it
Yeah, and it's like they have peace, whereas like the monsters or the souls in the hotel did not, and maybe he can like help people not become these evil entities by helping them pass peacefully, I guess.
exactly. And also knowing that, it's okay. We're all going to die. It's not
Right.
it's not something to be afraid of, which is then
Mm-hmm.
juxtaposed by the True Knot that they talk about they feed on fear and
Yeah, they want you to be
they want you to be
afraid.
afraid, but ultimately why are they doing what they're doing? Because they are scared to death of dying. And
Yeah, because it gives them immortality, right? Like the more souls they suck, they stay alive
they stay
longer or
alive
something.
longer, yes.
Yeah.
But we see in the movie that when they die, it is screaming and wailing and gnashing, and it is a terrifying, painful process.
Good.
Yes, exactly. But once again, it's that juxtaposition, and I can't remember if it was King or Flanagan who helped point this out, but it's the people who are so afraid of dying that will do anything to stay alive, that when they do die, it is the scariest, most painful thing. But if you're just a normal person who just goes about the natural course of your life, death can be this wonderful, peaceful transition to the next stage. And I feel like the movie does a really good job of, without hanging a lantern on it, showing the difference between our good guys and our bad guys.
Yeah, and I think too, like I had read Flanagan was going through a personal loss, and I feel like you can feel that in the movie.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. It's
yeah.
infused by someone who knows what this is like to go through.
Yeah, and I think he struggled with addiction too, and I feel like that theme comes up in his work kind of a lot. Like in The Haunting of Hill House, there's addiction and death and grieving. Like, I mean, I guess because he's dealing with horror probably too, but I do think he tackles that pretty
I
well.
agree. So I think that's the cool thing about The True Knot is that it's a completely different take on vampires in a way. But
Yeah, I like
I like
that. And it feels very Stephen
it
King,
feels
right?
very
Like he's always coming up with these kind of unique new ideas that feel like they're in his world.
but also metaphorically significant
Yeah.
by balancing the two sides off of each other. And I think when you
Yeah.
talked about Stephen King having optimism, I think that's it. The good guys always end up winning. It,
Yeah. And that's why even in The Shining, like, his dad is abusive and an alcoholic, but he has kind of an almost unrealistic redemption at the end.
see, I
But I think that's because he is more optimistic, that like you can get through stuff.
yeah, I think because I don't feel like he has any redemption in the movie, and
No, no,
no,
no. No, in the book
in the
only.
book
Yeah.
only, yes. But you're right. I think it's because he's willing to sacrifice himself at the end of the book. That's his redemption.
Yes.
It
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it's finally he makes a sacrifice.
Right. He becomes less selfish.
Yes.
Cuz I mean, they make a point about addiction being kind of selfish,
Hmm.
and so, yeah. I can see why people like that more, especially if you're not really into horror or you don't like how dark it can be. Like I think Stephen King, just provides like a kind of like a happy ending a lot of times
I know it's weird to
that
think
helps with
that,
that.
but yes, you do get a quote unquote happy ending at the end of most Stephen King stories.
Yeah, or like if you've watched like the mini series, which I actually didn't like, but
No, and
like
yeah, yes, I know. Yes, I agree. It.
the bushes coming to life and stuff like that was in the book, but it didn't. I think people were just like me; they were a little too married to like if the Kubrick film hadn't come out, it's a lot easier to digest. So I feel like Doctor Sleep does this really well because it kind of like pays homage to that, but it is more like magical and fun and very much like the stuff Mike Flanagan makes anyway. So I don't know, just all those elements are there.
Exactly. I think that's it. That's it. Now, I have to ask because I made a
Hmm.
request of you, and I'm curious. Did you
Yeah.
watch the director's cut this time around?
So I tried to. I looked it up on iTunes and on HBO Max, and I read online that you could watch both the theatrical and the director's cut. And I'm just going to be honest with you, I'm not sure which one I watched because this is only the second time I've ever seen this film. So I don't. Can you tell me like what's different in the director's cut, and I'll tell you if I got to see it or
Okay, so
not.
here's the thing. Where did you watch it on iTunes or did you watch it on Max?
I watched it on
Max
Max.
only has the theatrical.
Okay,
Um,
then Google lied to me. I'm
no,
sorry.
it's fine. Unless it's okay. Here's the deal: the director's cut is 3 hours long. It's 30 minutes longer than
Okay, I don't think it was 3 hours.
okay,
No.
and also The weird thing about the director's cut is that I saw the theatrical cut one time in theater, and then when it came out on home video, I immediately watched the director's cut.
Okay.
It is a weird thing that, unlike other movies that I enjoy where there's a director's cut and they throw in like 30 more minutes, I feel like in those films, it's like, wow, this 30 minutes made this gigantic difference. Or I could tell you where all the 30 minutes are that were missing from the theatrical. And there's something about the director's cut of Dr. Sleep that I can't tell you where the 30 minutes are because it all just holds together.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to see it again, it sounds like. But I really did try, and I looked everywhere, and it wasn't. I wonder if at one point they did offer two versions on Max or something.
I
and they
think
took it away.
that they've done that before. They have done that before.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you get it on iTunes or on Vudu, I was watching it on Vudu. It's in the special features.
Okay, so I would have had to purchase it.
You would have had
then,
to
it
have
sounds
purchased it,
like. Okay.
and it's only in HD because even I bought the 4K home release,
Interesting.
and the theatrical's in 4K, but the director's cut, which is on a separate disc, is only in 1080 HD.
All right. Well, you'll know that I dedicate a lot to the show, but I can't buy every movie. So I guess in this case, hopefully you can forgive me.
Oh,
I'm
of course
sorry.
I can. There is a cool thing, though, that the director's cut does that's noticeable, even if I can't
Okay.
point out where the 30 extra minutes of footage is, because once again, it's so
Okay.
seamless. There
Yeah.
are chapter cards.
Ooh, I like that because the Kubrick film had that.
Well, and all the chapter cards are the names of chapters from the Dr. Sleep book,
Oh, wow.
except the final act, because we'll talk about that. He uses a chapter title from The Shining.
Nice.
But it actually will come up and say chapter 1. And it will name a, like would be in the Stephen King novel, a thematic section of the movie with the title that Stephen King used in the book.
Nice.
So there's like Empty Devils, Turn World, Parlor Tricks. And if you're familiar with even familiar with the movie, you might recognize what part of the movie I'm talking about just by the chapter titles. And Flanagan inserts those into the movie, so the movie's divided into these chapters.
Oh, nice.
So that's that's the most noticeable thing that you'll see about the director's cut.
Okay. Well, I guess let's transition into then talking a little bit about, can you pick like maybe, I don't know if we'll have time to go through all of the best scenes, but maybe a couple of the scenes that you like the most?
Absolutely. I got 3 I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
The first off, and this is a horrible thing to start with, but I feel like we have to talk about the baseball boy scene.
Yeah.
Because that scene is the one scene in this movie that when I saw this sucker in theaters, it made my flesh crawl.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's different for people who are parents when they watch that scene.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you, as a mom and a dad, my wife and I, because by that point we had 2 of our 3 children. And oh dear God, that scene scares the ever-loving crap out of you if you have kids.
Oof.
Just the idea, because the knot looks so monstrous when they feed, like, because they move in a pack, and they're killing a kid, and even so much.
Yeah, that is brutal. Like, I feel like you don't see that in movies a lot. Like, it's pretty chill.
I wasn't sure if they were, like, it's in the book, but it was one of those scenes that's like, are they actually going to do this? Like, sometimes you're like, movies will shy away from things because they don't think it'll hit with the audience. And I'm like,
it's a bold choice.
and I'm like, wow, you went there. And it is, in my opinion, the single most horrific scene in the movie. And if you want to call this a horror movie, that's the horror scene in this movie.
And also when they like suck the souls and like, breathe into each other's mouths and stuff, I always feel like it looks like they're doing drugs. Like it looks like they're
No,
doing like meth or something.
absolutely. No, it's not just drugs. It's also like sex.
Yeah, it's like
It's an
very
orgy.
yeah.
They're having a death orgy.
Yeah, it is like really chilling.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
So, now I did read a behind the scenes story about the filming of that scene. That
Mhm.
apparently after they did it, because the actor who's playing the baseball boy, he is screaming and he's doing a fantastic job of acting his little heart out in this scene. And apparently, all the actors playing the True Knot, would be just so, like, when Flanagan would call cut, they would all just like be so like uncomfortable, and like they were
Yeah, I can
disturbed by what they
imagine
were doing.
that.
And the kid would get up and go like, "Hey everybody, how you doing?" Like he was able to bring everybody back because he was just having fun.
Yeah, he's probably gonna watch it as an adult and be like, "Oh my God,
I
I was overselling this."
but I thought that was an interesting thing, that even the actors were disturbed by the scene they were doing.
Yeah.
But then the child was the one who was just,
He's like, "This is
this is
pretend." I guess
pretend.
kids pretend a lot, maybe that's why. I don't know.
So I always thought that was an interesting behind the scenes story
Yeah, that
about that
is.
scene, because it's also like such an important moment in the movie, because it's
Mhm.
when Rose finds out about Abra.
Yeah.
And it's also kind of the turning point in Abra and Danny's relationship, because
Mhm.
she has that psychic wave that even puts the red rum callback on Danny's wall. So I feel like it's a pivotal scene because it's the one truly horrific scene in this movie, and it's a
Yeah,
turning point for the story.
I agree.
The second scene I loved. It's in Turn World. It's actually where the title of the chapter comes from, but that awesome scene where Rose goes into that trance to track down Abra, and Abra's got the trap waiting for her. But just just that imagery of when she kind of like, her spirit like goes up into the sky, and like she's
Yeah.
staying in one place. It's the world that's revolving, you know, her.
Mhm.
And if you've read the Dr. Slate novel, it's very similar to, it's different but similar to the way that King uh, describes the idea of like, almost like a lazy Susan or a turntable, as how they like
Yeah.
do this like tracking of each other through The Shining. And I just thought the visuals, like, I've read that there were some visual effects, but there's also some practical effects going on. And I feel like it shows, and it makes it look
Mhm.
cooler, especially like the lighting when Rose
Yeah.
lands in Abra's room. Like, it's very it's intentionally theatrical. It's not
Yeah.
movie lighting, it's theater lighting. Like the giant
Mhm.
spotlight that shines down on her when she gets trapped. I just think technically that is just such a well shot scene.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely agree.
I mean, what were your thoughts when you saw that? Like, I don't know, did you have as strong as a reaction as I did, or am I just nerding
Do you
out
mean to the baseball scene thing or to
to
this
this?
scene? I really like the way they portrayed like using their powers. Because I always think that's hard to show, like especially when they're kind of like psychic
Mm-hmm.
powers, or it's supposed to be like in their mind. And I think especially the choice to like have all those scenes in the hotel, which I feel like aren't in the book, right?
Uh, the scene.
Of the Overlook
Oh, when we get to the
stuff.
Overlook. Oh no, oh
Yeah.
no. We'll talk about that because the Overlook is where I'm going next. So,
Oh, okay. I'll stay where we were then. I agree that it looked really neat. I don't think it stuck out to me as much as it did you, but it definitely stuck out to me a great deal.
yeah, I think that's just me because, once again, all I'd ever seen of Flanagan was his Netflix stuff. So
Yeah. It's like this is what he can do when he has a big budget,
Exactly.
basically.
And I'm like,
Yeah,
and I was
yeah,
impressed.
yeah. No, I agree.
Uh, but yeah, my final thing I want to talk about is that entire section at the end of the movie that takes place at the Overlook.
Those are my favorite scenes, obviously.
Obviously.
But I think the one that sticks out to me the most, or my probably my favorite scene of the whole movie, is like the bar scene, where he's with his dad and his dad has replaced Lloyd. He even calls himself Lloyd now, because that scene from the original The Shining movie was one of my favorite scenes. For some reason, when he's at the bar and also like the party, that is like my favorite part of The Shining. So like this nod to that, and now his dad is the new bartender and is, I don't know, just the whole conversation they have, and then the big change, that Danny doesn't drink in that moment is just, I don't know, it's really good. I really like that.
The thing that I find incredible about the entire Overlook sequence in Doctor Sleep, and here's where I'm going to get into massive spoiler territory for books, movies, the whole shebang,
Yeah,
is that
do it.
the Overlook scenes are not in the book of Doctor Sleep,
Yeah.
because the Overlook gets blown up at the end of the Shining book.
Right.
What Mike Flanagan did is he took the ending of The Shining from the novel, and since Kubrick didn't use it, Flanagan said, well, why let a great ending go to waste? And he gives the ending of the Shining novel to his movie.
Yeah, you're right.
Right. So that's one of those places where up until this point, the Doctor Sleep movie has been an incredibly faithful adaptation of the Doctor Sleep novel until this point, because the ending of the novel doesn't work with the way the Kubrick movie ended.
Right.
And this is where I thought Flanagan was so creative and like, well, how about I just merge the two? And
yeah, no, I agree.
And this is where, you talk about the fact that Flanagan found the blueprints and reconstructed the hotel set. And I mean, even so much as that, like when Rose is in the lobby coming after Danny, they are beat for beat mimicking what Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall did in The Shining.
Yes.
Like I've seen the side-by-side comparisons, and it is incredible. Like,
yeah, I mean, you gotta love the movie for that, for sure.
Oh my god, yeah, it's so good, and there is something so satisfying when Danny opens all his boxes and just lets those go. Like when you see Rose get it, you're just like, yes.
Yes, it's so good. Yeah, I have to say, like, the first time I saw this movie, I think there was a part of me that was kind of, I don't know. I think I was just being a brat in the sense that, I love The Shining so much that nothing can kind of come close to it. I mean, it's just like my holy grail. So I had a hard time really appreciating this film. But I think as time has worn on, I've seen more of Mike Flanagan's stuff. I think I look back at it differently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll have to admit, you are being much more generous to the film than I thought you were going to be based on some text conversations that we had. And I was just like, oh, this is going to be an interesting recording.
Well, and I'm not going to like shit on it. I mean, it's just not my style anyway.
No, you're not. I mean, and you have shown that, in the past, but I'm glad you had a greater appreciation for this film. But I think because what it ultimately boils down to is, Flanagan, you son of a bitch, you did it. You really you found a way to make this work for anybody.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, whether you've seen the movie, read the book, or did both, you did it.
Yeah.
And I just tip my hat. And also just made a good movie. I mean, like, made a really good movie. But
you're right, it's hard to please like new fans and old fans, and I think he did that pretty well.
I think so too, because when the movie came out, it did not do financially well. why you release a horror movie in February, I have no idea. Um,
Yeah, that didn't make sense to me, but
and so financially, it did not do well. But everyone who
Mhm.
did see it, like, people appreciate this movie.
Yeah. I've only really heard good. I've actually never even seen someone online say they didn't like it. So
There's always somebody online who's going to say something. It's
yeah,
it's
that's
the
true.
internet, but it's just a well-made movie. And like I
Hmm.
said, when you do get a chance to watch the director's cut, it's a
Hmm.
good 3 hours. Like I said, you'll struggle, except for the chapter cards. You'll have a really hard time trying to figure out where the 30 minutes is because it all just hangs together. It's just so good. And it does have a moment from the Dr. Sleep book because they do go back to the
Hmm.
Overlook in the book. It's just that, the hotel's burned down. Like they go back to the grounds,
Right.
you know, and but you do get that moment where Danny gets to reconcile with his father in a way.
Hmm.
And it's a little bit more, you know, you know, the book makes it a little bit more ambiguous, I think, than the movie does. I think the
Hmm.
movie like lets you in on the secret about what's going on. Um, Even though the way the end of the Shining movie goes, I'm trying to reconcile how does Jack's spirit like what was the turnaround? There was no redemption for Jack in the movie, so how does the redemption work in this
Hmm.
movie? That's the one part that doesn't quite work for me when I know how the book ends versus how the movie ends.
I could see that.
Did it work for you? And did you can you reconcile it as someone who, in your case, is a bigger fan of the movie than I am?
Yeah, because I feel that this is Mike Flanagan's interpretation. Even though he's taking imagery from the Kubrick film and paying homage to that, it's his film to me. So I can accept it.
Okay, good.
It's his interpretation, and so it doesn't have to make sense with the first movie for me.
Okay, good. Because I just like the movie, so
Yeah.
yay. So, but
Well, it's impossible for me to not like. I think it's hard for me to not like something Mike Flanagan does, and then, I mean, it's paying homage a lot to a movie that I love. So like, even though it's different and it's not my favorite, I mean, I'm still gonna like it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
If that makes sense.
And I'm sure it's no surprise to you that I enjoy this movie much more than I do The Shining film.
Right. I
However,
mean, that's fine.
I will say, and I think this might be another shocking statement, I think the movie of Doctor Sleep is better than the book.
I don't think I've read the book Doctor Sleep. I was thinking about that while we were talking about this. Maybe I did and I don't remember. I know I read The Shining, but I don't know if I read Doctor Sleep. Maybe I did.
I'm just gonna say that
I'll have to look at my iPad.
I just think that what Flanagan did in the adaptation is a
Hmm.
cleaner telling of the story than even King
Mm.
did in his novel. And
Wow.
so like where I will go back and I don't read books a whole lot because I have so many other books to read. So that says something when I say I've read The Shining 3 times. Uh,
Yeah, obviously you like
Obviously.
it.
And I'll revisit the book more than I would revisit the movie, where with Dr. Sleep, I would revisit the movie way sooner than I would revisit the novel. So for me, as being the book nerd that I am, that's a tremendous compliment from my point of view.
Okay, I'm going through my books, at least on my iPad, and it is not on here, so I don't think I've read it, but I would have to go through, look at my physical books as well.
Okay.
So stay tuned.
Ooh. Cliffhanger.
But yeah, cliffhanger. Um, well, nice. Okay, well, is there anything? I know you talked about your three favorite scenes, but is there anything else about the film that we haven't touched on yet that you were hoping to cover?
No, I think we nailed it. I think because we did such a great introduction, I think that's where I got I got everything out at the beginning. So there's
Yeah, I almost feel like the setup of what we were about to talk about, we were both really interested in. You know, it's like we like the movie, but there's so much around it that we wanted
well,
to
there's
talk
so
about.
much history, and I think the history is so important because a lot of times, and I think this has borne itself out in a lot of conversations we've had, especially when I bring a movie to this podcast. It's the history that I have with a character or a franchise or a book or a movie that really informs why the movie means so much to me.
That makes sense. And I that actually answers one of my questions for you already of, why do you watch this movie? Why have you seen it more than once? Why do you keep reading The Shining? Like, what is it about it that you keep coming back to?
And like I said, the book The Shining is just legitimately scares the crap out of me. Like the way the movie doesn't scare me, the book scares me because of this, because I can get inside the characters' heads and the psychological like what the thought, those dark thoughts, like that's what scares me more.
Yeah.
And every time I reread it, I was single, then I was dating, and then I was a father. It was just like, as I transitioned in my life, it's one of those books that, like, as you get older and you have kids, the book becomes scarier to you.
That makes sense.
And so Doctor Sleep just sort of carries that on. But then with the movie, you just get a incredible hurricane, perfect storm of how is Flanagan going to pull this off? And he does.
Yeah, absolutely. How would you advertise this to someone that may not have, that hasn't seen this movie before? Like, what would you say to get them interested?
I would honestly say, I mean, one, you can't watch this without having either read or seen The Shining. So I think my elevator pitch is, have you read The Shining? Have you seen The Shining? Great. Here's a sequel. What happens to Danny?
That's pretty good.
I mean, because once again, the movie can please either one. Whether you've read the book or seen the movie. It means something. Yeah. It can mean something for someone on a different level. But it has the only person it would have no meaning to is someone who has not experienced The Shining in any form.
That's true. It's kind of hard to avoid The Shining, like, culturally, I think. But if you have, probably need to at least watch that first or read it first or something.
Something,
I
yes.
agree.
Before delving into Dr. Sleep.
Yeah, 100%. Well, as usual, Scott, thank you so much for coming on, and always appreciate having you. Is there anything you want to plug before you go?
I already did all my plugging really at the beginning, but once again, you can subscribe to my podcast, the DC Squadcast, on any podcatcher of your choice. If you can find I Love That Movie, you can find DC Squadcast. And then 9 o'clock Sunday nights at the Film Junkie YouTube channel. That is where you can find the DC Fanimated stream. I'm not really sure when this episode will be dropping, but like I said, if you want to see two nerds talk about Superman, the animated series, or Batman, the animated series, 9 o'clock Central Time on the Film Junkie YouTube channel, Sunday nights.
Nice. Thank you again.
Thank you.